Today's talk is the talk number 2 on impermanence. This is a series of 4 talks that I'm going to be giving on what are called the 4 thoughts that turn one's mind to the Dharma. Now, to give you a little bit of background, the first one that I gave already is about precious human birth. And this one talks about how fortunate we are to be born in a human body and to be born in the country that we were born in, to have come in contact with the Dharma, to be interested in the Dharma, to have various freedoms and leisures so that we can practice the Dharma. And then, of course, the ultimate goal of Buddhism is to attain Buddhahood and to attain liberation from the suffering of samsara. So as a human, we are in a very, very special place where we're able to accomplish this goal, to accomplish the ultimate meaning of our life. And so it's important to meditate upon this. However, we need to keep focused on this goal. We need to avoid distraction. We need to process obstacles that keep us from working towards accomplishing this goal. We need to work with laziness. And especially, we need to let go of strong attachments. There is a story about a man that visited an island. And while he was there, he noticed that it was full of jewels laying about around the land, all over the place. And he spent quite a bit of time there. And then when it was time for him to leave and go back home, he got on his boat and went back home. And when he got back home, he realized that he had forgotten to take any of the jewels with him. And we want to avoid this situation in our present life. The situation that we're in is actually even better than being surrounded by jewels, because this leads us to the ultimate complete cessation of suffering and attaining complete liberation and Buddhahood. And this is the second of the 4 ordinary foundations, or the 4 thoughts that turn one's mind to the Dharma. And I am going to go through this using 5 Kadampa slogans. The Kadampa was a separate lineage that actually existed before really the Kagyu lineage came into being in its present form. Gampopa had trained as a monk in the Kadampa tradition, and he joined the Mahamudra teachings that were passed on to him by his guru Milarepa with Kadampa teachings. And in the present 4 main lineages of Tibetan Buddhism, all of them have incorporated many of the teachings of the Kadampa school. They're Mahayana teachings, and the Kadampas-like slogans, the 7 points of mind training, come from the Kadampa tradition. So the 5 slogans that I'm going to concentrate on today are: first, think that nothing lasts. Then think or contemplate that many people have died, and actually individuals that you know who have died. Then think repeatedly of the many circumstances that might cause your death. And this can be uncomfortable, needless to say. And then think about what will happen at the time of death. And then finally, think about or contemplate what happens after death. So the first of these contemplations is that nothing lasts. So the universe had a beginning, that the Tibetans talk about an era of creation. And then during this time, then life appeared on Earth. And it's fine to think about that life evolves like Western science says. There's no problem between Western science has to say about evolution and life appearing. But then after life appears, eventually there will be the end of this era of duration where life is, well, the environment on Earth and actually in the whole universe will cease being a suitable place for sentient beings to reside. And then when life can't be sustained in this universe, beings will go to other universes, and eventually the universe will disintegrate. This gives you an idea of, you might say, the long-term outlook of Buddhism, that there have been countless previous universes and there will be countless universes in the future. And even within a universe, there are countless galaxies, and within the galaxies, there are countless worlds and so forth. So it's a very immense place, both in terms of space and in terms of time. So on our world, there is constant change. That if you look at things, even in long-term outlook, that mountains arise and then gradually they decline, that rivers come and go, that climate changes. And just getting back to rivers here, I'm going to, and actually a little bit more, just about this area here. I went to an area, it was a natural area up in the Rice Lake area. And the area had, at one point, had rivers on it. And then it subsided and was covered up with layers of rock, dirt, sand, whatever, and was buried for billions of years. And then at some point, it was brought up to the surface again, and all the earth, rocks, whatever was on top of it, gradually wore away. And here you had these billions of years old rocks, and you could actually see where a river billions of years ago had eroded into this solid rock. And right here where I live, the bedrock is sandstone, and sandstone can only be formed underwater. So it wasn't that long ago that this place right here where I live and much of Wisconsin was underwater, long before the glaciation period came. And in fact, I think you might enjoy this. There are a lot of what are called hardheads here. They're boulders that are not made out of sandstone. They're much harder. And I call them imported rocks because a glacier probably brought them here from at least what is now the Lake Superior area, if not from Canada. So the geology here and all over the world indicates constant change of the earth. That, but we don't look at it that way. We seem to feel that it is unchanging and so forth, but it's just a matter of the way we look at it, the way we perceive it as a human being. So days go by, weeks go by, months, years, seasons, centuries, that all of this is constantly changing, is constantly moving. Buildings and possessions deteriorate as soon as they are made. I have owned my present home for 49 years, and I have developed a saying, because I have done so much maintenance on the house over those 49 years, and that is, because of impermanence, maintenance is permanent. And I've got a lot of maintenance projects to do this year too. So everything that we experience in this material world is subject to change and impermanence. And us humans, we like to think that we can, you might say, hedge our bets about impermanence. And so we take out health insurance, life insurance, property insurance, liability insurance, auto insurance, and so on and so forth. None of these negate impermanence. If you die, your life insurance won't get you your life back. If you are sick, you might be able to prolong your life, but really all doctors do is prolong life. They do not save life. Having health insurance might give you a better quality of life while you are alive, but again, that's all. And now with this pandemic of COVID-19, it shows you how precarious our lives really are in terms of disease. So if we look at our body and our speech and our mind, our bodies are constantly changing. This is not the same body that I had yesterday. I have eaten fresh food today, had fresh water to drink, had tea to drink, and I put a lot of things into the body. And then I went to the bathroom and I got rid of a lot of things that I put into my body yesterday. There is a Greek philosopher, I think it's Heraclitus, that said you can't step into the same river twice. And the point of that is that once you step into the river and then get out of the river, it's a different river that you step back into. Plus, the person, the individual that steps into the river is changed. And when he steps into the second time into the river, he has now already stepped into the river once. So the world around us is constantly changing. Our bodies are constantly changing. We age. When we're young, we can't wait to grow up. And then when we get older, we can't wait to slow down the aging process, which is pretty hard to do. I remember my grandmother in her late 80s telling me this very sternly, looking at me, and she said, "Don't you ever get old." And yeah, that's a good outlook, but she didn't tell me how to do it. And of course, she died a few years after that. And our speech is constantly changing too. In our mind, if we observe our mind, and if we are meditators, and if we are mindfulness when using mindfulness when we are not meditating, we will see that our mind is all over the place. That both when we meditate and when we are off the cushion, that we can think about anything. Our minds are extremely creative, and so forth. During the day, our mind is busy. At night, maybe we're dreaming part of the time. This is something that I think is a good way to see how busy your mind is, and that is listen to your favorite song and try having your mind not wander from the song, to actually be present, listening to every single moment of that favorite song of yours. Our psychology changes. We start with early childhood psychology, then there's adolescent psychology, then there's adult psychology, then there's midlife crisis, then there is retirement, and then old age, and finally geriatric and hospice psychology. That as we go through these life changes, our psychology changes, what we think is important, and so forth. If we have really strong habitual patterns, it might seem like we underneath are not changing, but actually we are changing, and habits can change even if we feel we don't want to change. And fortunately, because we're all Buddhist here and we would like to attain enlightenment, we can change. So then the next one is to think of many people who have died. That it's kind of interesting. If you read the newspapers these days, it's one important person or famous person or person that did something that you never realized they're the one that did it, that is dying of COVID-19, partially because they're older and more susceptible to succumbing to the disease. It reminds me a bit of like when it was in the late 80s and early 90s with the AIDS epidemic, where again, you would have in the news these famous people that died of AIDS. And it's good to think about this, that being wealthy, being powerful, inventing something important, and so forth, none of this can stop you from dying. And in this area, here is one of my favorite poems. It's by Percy Bysshe Shelley, and it's called Ozymandias. And that is another name for Ramses II, who was a very powerful Egyptian pharaoh. And Shelley wrote this in 1818. I met a traveler from an antique land who said, quote, "Two vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them on the sand half sunk a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculpture well those passions read, which yet survive, stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed. And on the pedestal these words appear, quote, my name is Ozymandias, King of Kings, unquote. Look at my work, you're mighty and despair. No thing besides remains around the decay of that colossal wreck. Boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away. So now think of all the people that you know who have died. Relatives, friends, famous. The Buddha died. All other enlightened beings in the past are gone. Now, fortunately, the qualities of these enlightened beings pervade the three times, and we can receive their blessings and so forth, but their bodies are gone. So there are four thoughts that are good to think in terms of impermanence. And these four thoughts are called the four ends. The end of collection is dispersion. The end of rising is falling. The end of meeting is parting. The end of birth is death. So almost everyone that has been born in the past is dead. Everyone that has been born 100 years or more ago, almost all of them are dead. In 100 years, almost everybody that's alive now will be dead. Even in 50 years from now, probably all of us will be dead. So nothing transcends death except enlightenment. I found it helpful, actually, to keep a list of keeping it on the shrine, or my puja table was actually a good place to keep it, but write down people that I knew that have died, that were relatives, family members, friends, and so forth. And you will probably remember more and more people as time goes on with this list. But the point is that we cannot escape, that nothing transcends death except for enlightenment. And then think repeatedly of the many circumstances that might cause death. First of all, accidents happen. You can die perfectly healthy. That no matter how much time you spend at the gym, how much time you spend eating food that are considered good for the body and healthy and so forth, that accidents happen. And sudden disease happens, chronic disease happens. Again, COVID-19 is a very good example of sudden disease. 6 months ago, this was unheard of. And now, here it is, there is no vaccine yet, and the mitigation is not working very well. So our bodies are unreliable. I've known people that have had strokes and literally spent years lying in bed about all they could do. This one person that I'm thinking about, all she could do when I would visit her would be to cry. She couldn't talk. I don't know if she could move her head, but she could cry. And obviously it was very disconcerting for her to be just lying flat in bed for years, unable to communicate. Cancer, heart attacks. There's just innumerable different ways that us human beings can die. Old age. Watch the news. Read the obituaries. You can pass laws to make the world safer, and you will still die. Again, the very best that us humans can do is prolong life. Then, finally, meditate on what will happen at the time of death. For most of people that are on death's door, they don't want it. It's not desired. They want to continue living. There are a few people that want to die, and we have assisted suicide, but in terms of Buddhism, that's not a very good choice, because this will just go with you to your next life, and your next life will not be nearly as good because you have now killed yourself. It's not an accident or disease. That was a conscious choice. So while you are approaching death, you can experience intense physical pain. You can experience intense mental pain. Again, I have been with some friends who have died, and even with massive amounts of narcotics, there still was pain. Your mind and your body become uncontrollable. You can't lift your hands or your head. You're just lying there, helpless, and your mind is running wild. And if you have unwholesome thoughts, they can send you to the lower realms in an instant at the time of death. So instead of grieving later, the time is now to set out to work towards being able to be in control of your mind at that time. So at the time after death happens, you take nothing with you. Everything is left behind. Your friends, your family, your possessions, your place, your country. Everything familiar is left behind. People don't want to see your body. The Tibetans use the term corpse when things are translated into English. Here in America or the West, we get a little squeamish about using a word like corpse. But the problem is that it is a dead body, it is a corpse, and people don't want to see it. So the funeral director, if it's all possible, embalm the body, which brings some of the color back to the body. And then if it's a woman, put makeup on and do the hair. And of course, they do the men's hair too and make them look, well, as some have said, look like they're sleeping. Or another thing that I heard a number of times when I was working at the funeral home, when I was working at my grandmother's funeral home, had a summer job, she looks better now than when she was alive. So when our consciousness leaves the body, it's blown about in the bardo, the gap between death and rebirth, by the winds of karma. We have no control over what happens there, unless we are an experienced practitioner. And our karma guides us to where we will be born next time around. So we are a prisoner of our past deeds. And now is the time again to prepare for that. This is really the main message of this impermanence teaching is, and contemplation, is that we have to realize that we will die at some point, that there are really no reliable refuges to protect us from death in the mundane world. We need to rely on the Buddha, Dharma, and the Sangha to be able to face death in a positive way and be able to go to a more positive rebirth, or ideally be reborn in Dewa Chen. So to summarize, we need a moment-to-moment awareness of death and impermanence of the world around us, the external world. But we need to approach it with a light touch as opposed to desperation. This light touch is really important. And this contemplation leads to realizing it in your heart. That your body is impermanent, your mind is impermanent, at least the contents of your mind is impermanent. And that even though phenomena appear to be stable, and reliable. There is really nothing stable or reliable there. This is an antidote for a number of different false ideas. One is, I won't die for a long time. And you really don't know when the time of death is going to happen. Probabilities are that you probably won't die for a long time. But I have certainly known a number of people who have died through accidents, through cancer, through heart attacks, and other surprising medical problems. The next is ignorance or denial, that there are people that I know that can't go to a funeral. It's just too intense. They can't deny that death can happen. So we have to realize that this teaching is for us. It's not that there are other people out there that need to hear it. It's because we need to hear it. And kind of in the same vein is we have to give up lip service and give this heart service. You have to take it in to your own experience so that when you're going through your daily life, you can access this in your decision making, rely on this wisdom. Another problem that we have is that when things go wrong, that we rely on ordinary appearances to solve our problems. We take refuge in the world of things. From my own experience, I moved out to this present house and the land as a place of refuge. This was long before I became interested in Buddhism, and I thought it would protect me. And in a way, it did give me temporary refuge and protection. And then my best friend died many years later, and I suddenly realized it doesn't protect me from dying, and it's totally useless, and I have to leave it all behind anyway. And that's what led me to, you might say, discovering Buddhism and then practicing Buddhism and so forth. That our worldly phenomena, worldly things, they can give us refuge temporarily, but in a way, it's like taking refuge in a sheep, and then the wolf comes and the wolf takes care of the sheep first and then goes after you. So things like things that fall into this category would be things like the government, healthcare system, science, education, our body, our possessions, our parents, our partner. And you could probably come up with a list of your own of things that you have at some point or another thought would give you security. So it's an infinite list of possibilities, as we are very creative human beings. So we need to forget about attachments and practice. We need to focus on how death affects us, and not be so concerned about other people ignoring or denying death. And finally, to continue to meditate on and contemplate that only karma will go with you after death. And karma will be the third talk in this series, and I will leave that for the next talk. If we understand impermanence at a deep level, we will see that we will never be in a secure, safe place. That samsara is insecure by nature, it's transitory, it's always changing. With this understanding, we can moderate our desires and our attachment and gradually lessen them. Our minds will go on after death. Our material, personal world will not go with us. We will leave all of our material possessions behind, as well as our friends, family, loved ones, and even our enemies that we might love to hate. There are limits to what we can achieve in the material world. There are no limits to what our mind can achieve. Life is too precious to squander. So please keep these thoughts in mind as you go through your daily life and are deciding where to put your time and energy and where to spend less time and energy. And of course, the best place you can spend time and energy is studying and practicing the Buddha Dharma.